This is an obvious question, but I have to ask it, and I don't know of any other subtle way to work myself into it, but we've been talking all around it. Tell us how you were personally, as a man, as a human being, not as a radio personality, but as a human being affected by the social revolution of the 60s, and just how did that impact you as a person inside?
Everything about the 60s, for me, on a socio-political, emotional, cultural, sexual, consciousness expansion level, was so profound and so significant that it altered the being that entered the 60s from the one who exited the 60s. It's about the guy who is being rushed to Cedar Sinai with those electric things in his heart, trying to get a pulse, coming back later after triple bypass heart surgery and playing tennis, being asked about the ambulance ride. Everything changed. Everything changed. Everything changed about the way I saw the world, the way I saw my government, the way I related to women, the way I related to other men, the way I thought of ambitions and hopes and dreams, my responsibility to other people, the universality of human suffering, the oneness of the earth, the significance of having God in your heart and center as a central propelling component to do good. Nothing was ever the same as a result of having gone through the most meaningful, joyous, and saddening experiences of the 60s. There was nothing that compared to it in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now. And I doubt if there'll be anything that will alter it. For those people who weren't there, I know that, when people of a certain age, mine, go on about the 60s, they basically tell us to shut up. They've heard their older brothers and sisters talk about it. They've heard their fathers talk about it. They've heard their mothers talk about it. And they're tired of these recollections and reminiscences, and tend to think of people who've been through it as being a bunch of burnt-out hippies who spent most of their time smoking dope, getting dirty, growing beards, having free love, living lives of abandoning goals and conventional wisdom, wasting their time. And it's a very unpopular perception in the times we're living in. And sometimes you got to know too much to argue or to judge, and sometimes you got to know when to do the good battle and not do the battle. You should have been there. That's all I can tell you. It was just the very best of times to be alive in America.
And it's interesting how those things, all the things that you said, people who don't understand it say all the things you just listed.
Yep.
And it was completely, totally the opposite of that, because we were talking about people who were completely engaged, usually the intellects of the, people that were going to colleges and learned that they owed something to society other than what jeans they were wearing or the latest electronic device. Plus, by the way, if you're holding an electronic device, guess which generation invented that for you? Talk to me for a moment about, because of one of the things that enlightened us to these viewpoints was psychedelics, LSD, very important. Again, if you're from this generation, it's not about getting wasted, it's not about partying. This is a spiritual experience. I like to look at it as our generation's communion wafer, Robbie Krieger of the Doors. In fact, the three remaining Doors will talk very openly and positively about this experience, and he said it enabled him to get outside of himself, look at what the Robbie Krieger was and who the real person was inside, and it changed him forever. What did that experience do for you?
Well, we live in a different time, Jim. You know that. Mm-hmm. And you know that any discussion having to do with, quote, drugs is very unpopular today and real risky business. So I enter this line of questioning with some obvious degree of trepidation, and I just want to say something by way of disclaimer, and that is, I don't encourage anyone to take anything, or for that matter to do anything that is illegal and dangerous, or something that somebody is not prepared to do. Drugs. In the 60s, there was a lot of stuff going around. The primary thing, of course, was marijuana. Well, in my opinion, marijuana is not a drug. It never was a drug. It's a plant, it's an herb, a sacrament. I started smoking it when I was 16, 17 years old, whatever it was, smoked it for 20 years of my life on a daily basis. And it was just fine. It was really fine. And I enjoyed the experience enormously. I think it should be legalized tomorrow, or decriminalized, or whatever you want to call it. It's one of the largest cash crops to be exported from California. If we taxed it, sold $1 billion worth, or however much there is, we could probably build 500 new schools with it.
And he's actually discussing it.
And as a matter of fact, I've heard the governor is discussing that. The marijuana that I knew certainly never hurt anybody that I ever knew about, and I don't personally recall anybody who died of marijuana use, and I think the literature confirms that. So my position on pot is pretty simple. It should be available to anybody who wants it, who's over 18 or 21, whatever it might be, and it's just not a big deal.
Right.
When it comes to lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, there is no pure LSD being manufactured today. In the 60s, there was one laboratory, if I recall, in New Jersey called the Sandoz Laboratory, S-A-N-D-O-Z, that manufactured LSD, and it was used primarily by psychiatrists, psychotherapists. And they used it as a device to get people to come to a certain level of consciousness in the course of their therapy. And it would later be popularized by people like Timothy Leary, who became my next door neighbor and a dear friend, somebody who I spent lots of time with, including quality time with, and Richard Alpert, who would become Baba Ram Das, and others, who would use the psychedelic experience, and specifically LSD, to bring themselves to a level of consciousness that they were not able to arrive at through conventional mechanism. And it was very profound and very meaningful. It was legal at the time in California to use it. I used it. I have no regrets about it. I miss it. It was a great teacher for me. was tremendously helpful. As Aldous Huxley would write, it helped to open the doors of perception. Those days are gone. There is no pure lysergic acid diethylamide available. Whatever you would buy today would probably come out of a bathtub in Venice or be manufactured by somebody who's mixing a bunch of unknown chemicals. And I certainly would caution anybody to use any kind of so-called mind expansion drug or chemical today. I want to be really clear about it, that in this time we're talking about, it was very, very different, and it was quite profound. And today it's quite dangerous, and if you can find a different way to get to where it is that you want to be, I would encourage you to do that.
And I just want to underline the point that this was a spiritual quest. This was not about partying. This was about, and that's why people took it in groups with someone who knew what they were doing, would go to the woods, commune with nature, see God in a flower. That's not a cliche. We actually could do that. But you're right. That's when you had Sunshine and Osley and Sandoz and that. And it was a whole different ethic.
And you can't, I mean, we can put this on television or radio or wherever we're going to put it, and this is the part of the interview I know that they would isolate.
Yeah.
And it would be the part that Bill O'Reilly would just freak out over, and suggest that we're trying to encourage people to engage in a form of behavior that in their mind today is like smoking crack or doing coke or shooting up or getting high or getting stoned or numbing the brain or going crazy or going off the edge. To a certain group of people today, it's all methamphetamine, it's all junk, it's all stuff that's going to rot the brain, make you jump off of rooftops, go crazy. And don't listen to the meanderings of people who have a distorted perception of what they think they went through. I know that. I know them. God bless you. I can just tell you that I knew then and I know now that I would have rather have spent an evening at Timothy Leary's house than I would trust myself in a car with Richard Nixon on a six-pack of Bud.
Well said.